That's all it means. Lordy is requesting to speak. Let's go ahead and we're going to bring up Lordy. All right, Lordy, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Glad to hear it. Um, Hopefully you haven't already discussed this topic into the ground, but I
Sure.
might have a different approach to it
Okay.
that you haven't heard. It's not traditional argument,
Okay. What you
but
got?
I'm on the side that I guess I lean more on morality is objective in the normal way we use in the average way people use the term, not in the sort of mathematical way. Because I know there's like a mathematical meaning of objective, and then there's the sort of common parlance. Uh, Like if you don't think morality is objective, what things do you think are objective
Hmm?
in like sort of human society, like outside of
Oh,
mathematics?
yeah. I mean, what I would consider something as objective is that it is not up to human interpretation into it continuing to be true, regardless of a human being there. And a really good litmus test that I like to use is whether or not that it can be measured. If it's measurable in any way, whatever you're measuring, that's objective. That measurement is objective.
Well, I think there's things that are not measurable. Like for example, um, we can't measure consciousness, but it's I think it's pretty objective that consciousness exists.
Um, well, you could probably measure the emergent property that we call consciousness, but like this idea of
Not at
like
this time.
distributing the difference between consciousness and not consciousness, well, that's blurred. That's blurred as fuck.
Yeah, it's not measurable with current technology or understanding.
But sure it is.
But can you show me the measurement that
Yeah,
whether a
we have
dog is
MRI
conscious or not?
scans whether or not that
MRI
a
just That just shows brain activity, not doesn't show whether something actually has experience.
well, now you're just talking about the initial emergent properties. You're talking about consciousness. I'm saying you can measure that. You can measure whether or not something's conscious.
I'm talking about like qualia, not just brain activity.
Yeah, that part is subjective, correct. But you said consciousness, which would be
Well,
an objective measure. That's fine.
when I say consciousness, I mean the actual personal experiential part, not just being like awake or brain being active.
Yeah, I get it. That portion is subjective.
But it's an objective fact that it's there though.
Yeah,
That's the objective part, but
sure,
it's not measurable.
sure.
So there are things that are objectively true that aren't measurable.
Wait, I just told you we can measure it.
Not the qualitative part.
Uh, yeah, that's up to subjective interpretation. Yes.
I don't think it's just a matter of opinion. I think it's a fact that qualitative experience exists. It's not, oh, I think it does, you think it doesn't. It's a
Um,
fact.
well, it depends on whether or not that you consider it to be valuable versus not valuable. Something worthy of considering versus something not worthy of considering. That's up to subjective interpretation, don't you think?
No, I'm not talking about morality yet. I'm just clarifying whether something can be objectively true but not be
The
measurable.
whole point of this discussion is whether or not that morality can be subjective or objective, and I'm saying that all morality is subjective. So if you're walking away from morality, we're not
Oh, I'm
talking
just
about the same thing then.
no, I'm gonna get there. I'm just trying to clarify the first point first because I think it's important.
Okay, so something that is not morality um, could be
I'm giving
objective,
another
even though it's
example of
not
something.
measurable. I'm saying like a good
Yeah.
litmus test is whether or not it can be measured.
Yeah, fair enough. That's probably true in most cases, but I think there's certain exceptions to that through
Okay,
logical, um, you know,
can
the
you give
rules
me
of
an
logic.
example?
So with most things in science, we don't we start with axioms. We don't just start from like the bare bones empiricism. We start with assumptions.
Hmm.
So the same would be true for morality. We start with the assumption that human positive experience is better than human negative experience. Same thing with like the rules of medicine. Like medicine's a science,
As
but
opposed
we
to,
start
wait,
with certain.
hold on. But would you say is it a positive experience to have to endure boot camp? Pretty negative experience, right? Boot camp.
But it might have positive outcomes at the end, right?
Ah, interesting. So it's almost like it's up to subjective interpretation.
Well, there's fuzzy boundaries, but there's also
But then that means it's
clearly
the
totally
fact that
negative.
it's up to interpretation tells me it's subjective.
Well, things can be unclear but still objective, I think. Like just because we can't
Like
totally
what?
define every single experience,
Like what? Wait, what would be unclear but objective?
because it depends on your axioms. So like,
I just gave you my axiom. So what would be something that is unclear and objective?
um, well, qualitative experience for one, like I was talking about
I don't
just
find that
now.
to be very compelling because then it comes into the question as to whether or not you value that uh, existence versus non-existence and like your own like I don't know phenomenological experience.
I
All
mean,
of
the
that
different.
it comes down to a subjective interpretation.
So another example then, something that's unclear is the definition of a chair. Like what's exactly a chair and what's not. But I still think it's once you um sort of once you agree that there's a concept that's right and wrong there. It's not just interpretation. Like you can't you can't just assert anything as a chair because it's your opinion. That would be wrong.
Why not?
Well, you could, but you'd be wrong.
Well, to some people you'd be wrong, and other people are maybe more open to the interpretation.
I don't think
Like you ever ask somebody
I think
like
you're being
you ask them,
open.
you think like a toilet is a chair. I guarantee you, I could probably find some people who think a toilet is a chair, and other people that are like, no way, toilet's not a chair. The fact it's up for interpretation, there you go, it's subjective.
Okay, but I guess what you're holding objectivity to such a high standard. So what is objective to you? Give an example.
It can be measured. It is not up for
But can you
a
give an
human's
example of it though?
interpretation to its existence.
What's an
Well, take for
example?
example, like universal systems, like sound, as an example, right? Sound is exhibited as air molecules that are vibrating that causes little hairs in your ear to, and then you experience sound.
Yeah, but there's still
So
there's
like
still
the
room for.
aspect of like the physical thing happening does happen independent of a person's like there to experience it. The exact physics of it does happen, right? So
Yeah,
that in
but
itself,
sound's a subjective experience. The
that's correct. The experiencing of the sound is in itself subjective. People's, here their phenomenological experience may be different, which is fine. But the point is that the air molecules vibrate. That's the part that's
Yeah,
objective.
I understand that, but I could say something about chairs. I could say, oh, the point is that the physical atoms in the chair exist, therefore chairs are objective. You're kind of reducing sound to its
Well, that
fundamental
you're
parts, so
talking
that
about
doesn't
that
make it objective.
well, you're saying that the chair possesses matter, then I would be like, yeah, that part is objective. It's not up to a person's interpretation to determine whether or not that it does or not. It does, for sure. It does.
So you're saying air vibrations in the air is real,
Hmm.
but sound is subjective.
Yeah, the experience of sound is subjective. Yes.
But not all um, air waves are sound. That's a subjective category.
What
There's certain,
all sound is air waves molecules
yeah,
vibrating.
all sound is airwaves, but not all airwaves are sound. So I can have something that's
Okay.
such a large wave it's not audible, or such a small wave it's not audible, like a dog whistle.
It's still observable. It's still a sound, right? It's operating under the
Yeah,
same
but
mechanics of sound, but we don't, hear it, but that's fine. That's just your phenomenological experience is different. It's still a
so
sound.
there's a fuzzy boundary though as to what counts and what doesn't.
No.
It's not agreed upon between people. I guess my
Um
point here is you're holding the word objective so narrowly that like almost nothing would fit in there except maybe some mathematical proofs, which makes it like a useless term.
I disagree. I just like I don't know. I just agree to disagree here. I suppose I don't really have anything to say beyond
Because I
that,
think
other than
the
like
concept of sound is an emergent property. The concept of chair is an
I mean,
emergent property,
let's look up
and they're
what is
both
the
open to interpretation
let's look up the
in terms
colloquial
of
definition of objective. Not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering or representing facts. Okay, so I'm dead on. It is not a narrow interpretation. It is narrow in the sense that a lot of things are not objective. I would agree with you. Most things aren't objective. But there do exist things that are objective versus subjective, and the objective is it's not up to a person to make that interpretation. So I agree with you that the emergent properties, I guess, like what someone refers to as chair, may differ from person to person. But like the idea of like the atoms that store the thing and like the macro substances that exist and being there, that it's in itself is objective. It is not up to a person's personal feelings or opinions as to whether or not that chair is there, at
well,
least in the empirical world.
they could choose to categorize the subatomic particles differently, not into atoms, but maybe into some other grouping.
Okay.
So why is their opinion invalid? That means the atoms are subjective as well.
No. Atoms exist independent of you able to observe it.
But people can
That's not a subjective interpretation.
atoms are made of particles, and people can choose how to categorize and label those
No, but
particles.
each of them have their own like chemical makeup and differences between them that make them different, and it's observational and repeatable.
Well, morality is also an observational phenomenon.
Sure. Like, for example, I could count the number of people that believe a specific thing. That would be an objective interpretation. But I'm saying that what someone determines to be right versus wrong, that's subjective. It's up to a person to make their own personal feelings or their own, opinions to consider what they consider to be valuable for a moral system, which is why I'm saying it's subjective. All morals are subjective.
I guess my problem is more, it's not as clear as you're giving off like the distinction between subjective and objective.
Okay.
Like, so morality kind of relies on once you just accept one basic assumption, morality is much more objective seeming. It's just, I guess you're not going to like this terminology, but just human flourishing would be the obvious term that comes to mind.
Okay.
So if you increase human flourishing, that's moral. That's what people mean by it.
Would you say
And that's,
Islam increases human flourishing?
oh, I don't know. But just because I don't know doesn't mean there's no fact of the matter out there.
Would you say that the Spartan way of society, where they throw malformed babies down a cliff, to be flourishing of society?
In my opinion, no, but I'm not certain about that.
So would you say it's up to? So would you say that would a Spartan disagree with you?
Yeah, we can disagree, but that doesn't mean there's no underlying truth.
What,
It,
but then that would
there's a
be
truth as to whether
subjective. That's literally what subjective
no,
means.
just because people don't know the answer doesn't mean it's not objective.
Yeah, yeah. So you feel that way, but the problem is that other people don't feel that way, and therefore it is up to a person's personal feelings or opinion considering and representing the facts, which means by its very nature and definition, it is subjective. Even at the
No, but
level of tossing babies down a cliff, which is
there's an
crazy to
underlying
me.
there's an underlying fact though. We just don't we just don't have the evidence to prove what it is. Like you could have
What is
someone,
that? What's the underlying fact?
if you had all the information available to you, you could demonstrate whether this practice is um, helping more people or not.
Okay, why are you propagating survival? Why are you choosing that over not?
But so this kind of question, I think you're kind of holding science to a lower standard than morality because
What?
you're accepting certain axioms about science, like evidence is valuable, logic is valuable. We should value evidence, like stuff like that, that you can't prove.
Do you understand when I say that a moral system, if a moral system is subjective, that doesn't mean we therefore ought not, it doesn't matter or it ought not care about it, right? You
Yeah, I
understand that?
understand, but I'm saying that science relies on axioms just as much as
Yes,
other belief systems do.
yes.
So why should we value empiricism? You said that empiricism is what makes something objective if you can measure it. But why should we value that? You
I'm,
can't. That's an
I'm
axiom
not
that you're
saying whether or
accepting.
not you should value it or not. I'm simply saying morality is subjective.
No, I'm responding by asking what makes why is it objective if something is supported by empirics?
I, again, it has nothing to do with my statement that morality is subjective. Whether or not I value empiricism is independent of whether or not that morality is subjective or objective.
Right, but I'm approaching it from a like I'm saying that your way of differentiating these is my argument is there is no distinction at underlying between objective and subjective.
I just explained the distinction.
But I'm trying to explain why the distinction doesn't work, but you keep changing the subject.
No,
So,
I'm directly on the subject. I'm pointing out how, hey, here's the distinction. It's this. And then you're saying that, well, I think it's up to interpretation what that is,
but I
which
asked you
is
what I
strange.
asked you what makes something objective, and you said something that can be measured, right?
No, no, I said a good litmus test is to measure it, right? But the definition is you're not influenced by the personal feelings or opinions in considering or representing facts.
Okay, so I guess what you're saying is there's an underlying objective truth, but the only way we can access that is through measurement, right?
Yeah, I mean it's the way that I like am able to see like okay, well this appears to be an objective thing. It seems to be pretty good at I mean, I don't know, maybe you could instantiate some way that measurement is not adequate.
But you can't, it's really hard to demonstrate why we should care about reason, logic, and measurement without appealing to those very things. That's what I'm getting at.
Um I mean, it's subjective as to whether or not you should or shouldn't care about it, but that's not really our discussion, is it?
Well, you're very narrowly focusing the discussion to make it impossible to um, respond with my type of argument, but
All right.
I'm
I mean, do you want to like try to lead me down your argument? Maybe
sure. So
go
I'll
for it.
try one more time then. So things like morality can be objective if we rely on axioms. Like say you're a utilitarian. you have some axioms, greatest good for the greatest people or whatever. Say you're a Muslim, your axiom is following the Quran as best to your ability is moral. So I can't, that's where that's within that framework, something can be objectively better or not. But you just disagree with the axioms. Um, Same is true for science, which tries to understand objectivity, because science has axioms such as empirical analysis of reality should be worth is a good way to understand objectivity. Another axiom, evidence is also good. um, Another one is that logic is internally consistent and coherent, and reason is also internally like coherent. But it's really hard to demonstrate why those axioms are good without appealing to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of have to accept it. I mean, I'm on your team. I do accept those axioms because they just seem intuitively true. But I can't prove them without appealing to them, which is circular, right?
Um,
Like I can't demonstrate why evidence
I mean, I
should
think I
be
under
valued
I
without you supplying evidence to you, which is internally, it's circular logic.
well, I think I understand what you're saying. Like, if you accept a specific axiom, right? Um, People will believe in a specific thing, and I suppose that it's possible that there could be a specific pathway that leads to the goal of that particular axiom, and then that particular pathway is objective. Am I
Yeah.
following your framework?
Yep.
Okay,
Exactly.
but that's not the morals. That's just the path, which again, the path is measurable.
But morality
That
is
would be
also the path.
theoretically measurable.
Like we say, is something moral? Is it moral to kill or not? That's not an axiom. That's within a framework where there's other axioms.
Yeah.
Like,
So, but but you're just saying that there is a path to least resistance, which that in itself is measurable.
yeah, I mean, to have a moral framework, you have to establish what your goals are first. Those
Yeah.
goals
Well, but
are
the
hard to
point is that the
justify,
axiom themselves,
but that's
it's
true for everything.
subject. Well, I mean, there's things
That's
that
my
are
point is that's
objective in
true
its
for
measurement,
everything.
but the point
That's
that
even
I'm
true for science. So
but here's the thing, right? It's fine. It's completely okay that something is subjective. It should not be an issue if a moral system is subjective versus objective. I don't believe that there is any objective morals. So like what I do is I subjectively interpret like what I value, and then I subjectively come to the conclusions as to what is valuable versus not valuable. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the moral system that everybody abides by, whether or not they're willing to admit it.
well, I think you can subjectively come to some axioms and then objectively come to the conclusion as to whether something is moral
The path to
past
least
that use,
resistance.
using logic.
The path to
But
least
wait,
resistance.
I'm not quite sure that I get the analogy, but
Like, you know how it is with electricity, it always
yeah.
goes to the path of least resistance. So when it comes to
Hmm.
trying to establish a specific axiomatic framework and trying to make sure that there is a maximization of that goal, there is likely, right, a single path that is the easiest or the
Yeah,
most effective way to do that thing, and that would be
sure,
objective in its measure.
sure.
Yeah.
Like it's like something can be a false premise. I know you probably, hopefully it doesn't sound condescending when I say this. I'm sure you know already, but like if I say within the world of Harry Potter, it's objectively true that what Ron Weasley marries Hermione or something, but that's
I don't
not
watch
actually
fucking
true.
Harry Potter.
But whatever, you're accepting that framework of looking at it already. So you
Do
can still use
Gandalf.
objective.
Do Lord of the Rings. I know more about that one.
Okay, it's objectively true in Lord of the Rings that Gandalf dies and is resurrected or something,
Oh,
but that's
based.
impossible
Based. Balrog
in
fight.
real life.
Yeah,
So
right.
you can make an objective statement in a sort of just incorrect framework, which is a fictional story. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Okay.
But it relies on your
Lost
axioms.
as
So
to how that makes it subjective, I guess. Like it is true. It is objectively true that in the movie, Gandalf dies to a Balrog and then is reborn with the
yeah,
power
so
of
I'm saying
Eru
something.
Iluvatar or
It's
whatever.
objective within the framework, the same way you can, but it depends on whether you're gonna accept those axioms. Like my point is that the way you're defining it, nothing's objective because you're
No,
saying, oh,
no, no, no.
unless you can
There's things
justify,
that are
because you're saying
object. I've
unless you
called
can
lots of things
justify the
objective.
axioms.
Stop saying that
But
I
I'm
don't
trying
think
to show
anything is
why,
objective.
under your own rules, it's not though, because you can't justify the axioms.
What? No, I'm
So
saying it's not up to an individual's interpretation.
so you said sound's objective, like the underlying science of it, obviously not the qualia, but the underlying science of sound is objective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's not up
But
to a
there's still
person's
axioms.
personal feelings or opinions. Like, for example, we observe blue. That's the quality, the blue, the phenomenological experience of experiencing the color blue. But we can also observe that there is like an electromagnetic spectrum that at this particular frequency that it outputs blue, right? And so that part is objective, right? It's a mathematical statement at that point. It is measurable. But whether or not you experience blue, that's a completely different discussion entirely.
Well, for one thing, that's so there's still axioms that you have to accept. You have to accept that logic is valid, for one thing,
What what am I
for
supposed
that
to?
to work.
What's the alternative to that?
That we live in an
Just
incoherent universe that doesn't
that's
follow the rules of logic.
that doesn't appear to be observational.
But you also have to accept the premise that observations accurately reflect reality. That's another axiom premise.
Okay.
So I'm saying is you still have premises and axioms or whatever.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it's the same as Islam. They have axioms.
Yeah,
You just don't accept their axioms.
that's fine.
So they're equally objective with different axioms.
No, because one of them can show to exist, and the other one's just kind of make believe in terms of like believing in Islam.
Right, but you already accepted you can't justify the axiom that observation reflects reality and that
Sure, I
the
can.
rules of logic apply
Sure, I can.
to everything.
Well, I mean, I could say that like I doubt my existence, therefore I must exist, because to doubt your existence, you must exist.
Well,
And then
observation of the outside world besides you.
from there, knowing that I exist. I mean, I guess I could operate that. Yeah, maybe there's like an assumption in the sense that like other people exist around me are also experiencing things. I suppose that would be an assumption. I could say like, for example, I'm a hard solipsist. There's really no way to actually disprove hard solipsism, but I operate under the assumption that it is. So I suppose that would be an axiom. Another one is like predictability, whether or not that like your structure system or your axiomatic system actually outputs to a predictable measure, as in like, you tend to be more right and wrong in your assumptions as opposed to not. Have you ever heard of the ducks in a pond epistemological argument?
Nope.
So let's say, for example, that you are standing along a pond and you have your friend with you, right? And you observe that there are ducks in the pond, right? And your friend, you look over, he's like, you see those ducks in the pond? And your friend says, yep, I see ducks in the pond, right? Would you say that there's ducks in the pond?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the part that you missed but neglected to see was the fact that in the ducks in the pond, it was actually not ducks. You were not staring at ducks, but actually a series of plastic ducks that was been left over by a hunter, and the hunter's currently in the bushes. You just didn't observe a hunter, right? So would you say that you observed ducks in a pond with this new knowledge?
I would say no.
Okay. Now let's make it more interesting. Let's say, for example, you're observing the plastic ducks in a pond, um, and you think that you see ducks. They're not really ducks, but there's another side of the lake that has real ducks in the pond. Would you say that you're correct, even though that you didn't observe real ducks in the pond?
No, you're still wrong.
Interesting. Even though that like the end result is effectively the same. Anyway, really good way to actually get around this is the predictability outcome, right? One thing that you could say, okay, well, during this time of the season, this species of duck comes to this pond, right? And so the probability of you being correct versus incorrect is much higher, whether or not you even observe ducks being in the pond or not in the pond, right? So I think predictability is the best way to determine something being real versus fake.
Well,
A justified axiomatic framework there.
Yeah, I mean, this is my personal view on it, but I don't think just being right by luck is good enough. But
Well, I didn't make an argument by luck. I made an argument on the basis of predictability.
the actual thing you observed weren't real ducks.
That's correct, but you wouldn't need to observe a single thing if you knew the migratory pattern of those ducks. You wouldn't need to even go to the lake to know that there are ducks.
True, but an observation is different than a prediction.
That's correct.
So the observation was still
I'm
wrong, but
saying
your
I
prediction may have been right.
I go in the way where it leads to better predictive outcomes. Right? If you predicted something and it doesn't lead to the expected outcome, you need to work on your epistemology. It's an area of improvement. What is it that made you think that you were correct but you were wrong? You with me?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yeah.
I thought that was a rhetorical question.
Well, I'm just, it seems to be that's the best axiom that I can come up with in determining what's true versus false. And I fail to see a better situation, a better system, right? Because I find Islam to be wrong all the freaking time, like all the time. They sit there and think that you can half your workforce, women, and that society gets better. That has never happened in history. That has never, ever happened in history. By the way, by reducing your workforce, all of a sudden life gets better. It's nonsense.
Well, in their defense, they would argue that
We don't care.
they're not, the women still do work, it's just homework.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Except there's like a thing called opportunity cost. And anyway, you get the point.
But yeah, I guess I'm arguing for a more expansivist definition of objective that includes more things, just
Okay.
because we kind of use objective, or it's not, the way we use it is not as objective as we think. Really,
Gotcha.
the only things that are truly objective are things that are like logically have to be true, like in mathematics. But then even then you have to accept that logic is true in and of itself. So there you go.
Okay. You got anything else for me, buddy?
Nope.
Cool. Well, it's nice talking to you, Lordy. That was a good discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Check to
Peace out.
axioms. Okay. Yeah.